I'm excited to invite onto the stage Cuifa, who from Day One Innovation in Basel. Last time I saw her was at this conference last year, and there was this massive thing going around the internet about a Scottish island that was for sale for £300,000. And for a laugh, we phoned up and we're like, whoa, £300,000, and it came with a lighthouse. Phoned up, and the guy said, oh, only 11 people have been to visit. And I thought, that's amazing, only 11 people, that doesn't seem like much interest. And then I said, oh, how'd you get to go and see it? And they said, all the other people came on their helicopter, and we realized we were priced out the market quite quickly. So Queef's going to come and talk with a wonderful panel, which is talking about the importance of including patients and clinicians in product development, and I will leave her to introduce the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, if I ask the rest of the panelists to join me on stage, I'm very excited today. It's my first time moderating. Usually I'm actually the one being grilled with questions. So it's nice to turn the tables a little bit on this one. So if we can ask the panel to have a seat. So very, very lucky today to be introducing quite a diverse panel. The experience across the board is interesting, and there's been an awful lot of conversations going on down at the back of the room as we were getting ready to step up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of the panelists individually and ask them what their connection to this topic is. So if we start off with Helge. Helge is an Associate Director for Population Health with the Novartis Foundation. Helge, do you want to tell me very briefly what your connection to this topic is?
Sure. So the Novartis Foundation designs and implements cardiovascular population health approaches across the world. Always in close collaboration with the multidisciplinary team of partners in these cities. And that, of course, encompasses also patients and also clinicians. And listening to them from the start when we roll out our initiatives is pivotal for us. And therefore, this topic of the panel is very close to our heart.
Thanks very much. Next up, we've got Hanno. Hanno is a partner in Deloitte, and he's one of the leaders in the life science practice. So Hanno, from your perspective, what does this topic mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the topic around a multidisciplinary approach to product development, and in particular in digital, but even pharmaceutical products, is actually about trust. Is how do you build the right mechanisms that whatever you develop, in particular in digital, whether that is an app, whether it's a companion app, or whether it's a public health intervention, that you can actually trust it, and that the foundation of it is actually vested and founded in what customers, the HCPs and the patients, and maybe even the payers actually need.
Fantastic. And finally, last but not least, we've got Samaya. Samaya comes to us from Amsterdam and is a very well-respected professor at 2 of the universities there. So Samaya, from your perspective and also from an academic perspective, what is your real tie to this topic?
I think that the development of AI, robotics technologies are not only being seen from a technical perspective, but that when we bring them into practice, there are so many different factors which play a role that building trust is often overseen, and that we have to dig deeper to understand why some technologies are not being adopted, are used the way the developers anticipated them to being used.
Fantastic. Okay, so from my perspective, I've been in the position of developing products for end users. I know very many of you in this room are also in that position as well. And probably you've also experienced the challenge that there is for actual adoption of the product. And realistically, we can create beautiful and wonderful products that we feel are vital and useful to the people and the end users we define them and design them for. But unfortunately, if they are not adopted by the end user, if they're not taken on board by the end user, we're really going to struggle with those excellent products. So let's look at how do we partially the multidisciplinary approaches, how do we increase the adoption of the use of these products, and how do we really hone the design of these products to be incredibly fit for purpose. So on that perspective, we have a vast topic that we can talk about. This conversation will probably go everywhere, and I get the feeling from the panelists that we're not going to run out of topics or things to say. So on that point, we're going to get started on it. I have a list of questions to get us started. I'm very high-tech and I don't have notes. Okay, so I'm going to start with a quick kick-off question really for everybody, and that is, I've asked you really to set the stage on how you are connected to this topic, but I think as well it's important that everybody gets a chance to really say what this title actually says to them and how you are going to plan to approach this conversation today. So would anybody like to get started? Otherwise, I'll name and shame. It's totally fine.
That's fine. I'm happy to get started. So I think I mentioned trust. And if I think about the product here as a sort of digital app or companion app or something that is about changing behavior, could be about diagnostic, could be around menstrual cycle app, could be diabetes, could be glucose monitoring, etc. What I find really interesting is that a lot of these products are conceived when we work with clients either as an idea by a commercial team who wants to do something and then implemented by a technical team. And often they fail to talk in the time between, and they often don't really take into account what patients, what doctors, what the actual usage experience is. And as a result of that, a lot of the first iteration just doesn't really generate the results that they want, and the adoptions are low. I think in particular, if I think about pharma-related apps or pharma-originated apps, I think the uptake is actually really, really low. And in part, it is about building the trust, and that trust has to come through how you develop it, how you engage patients and HCPs in the design of it. And it takes time. Use it well.
If I may respond to that, I think that trust is a very overhyped concept, because what you say is that the engineers and the designers often lack even within big companies. We have done some studies, they don't even talk to each other. Correct. And they don't understand what their interpretation of trust is. Correct. And in real practice, when we go to our patients or our clients, then trust is not a concept they have consciously thought about. For them, they need to work on their diabetes. They want to work on their health problems, their heart, they want to check their heart. So a lot of other issues come in place, and during the development stage, we often think about trust as a theoretical concept, and we often also, when we talk to each other, we do not know what we actually mean or what we define as trust. So I think that the whole trust and AI is an overhyped concept, and we often do not know what we are talking about because it has so many layers, and it's a very interesting concept to use it often as a marketing tool, so that you can say our patients trust our tools, but what is that trust? And in practice, patients and also clinicians have a very different concept of what they think is trust for them.
So would you say that trust has become one of those buzzwords that we use within the industry? And in fairness, we've actually potentially even artificially created that hype and noise around trust, either to make ourselves feel better or to have a differentiating factor that we say a product works more than another competitor's product?
I think so, because if you look at, what is really interesting is to talk about how accurate are the prediction models that actually predict some disease, or how accurate is it that your AI application works in the way you say that it works? Where is it based on? And trust is this overall concept which is often used to diminish a lot of other important aspects which we should actually bring to the foreground.
So we should be looking at credibility rather than trust, as in credibility of the product and the results that it generates, rather than just a blind trust into what it is the black box will give us.
I think we should educate our patients and clients and also our clinicians in what we mean by saying you can trust our AI tool, because what do we mean then? What is it that we have to trust? Do I have to trust the hardware? Do I have to trust the software? Do I have to trust the interface? And they're often also developed by many different parties. So that whole building trust is a very broad concept which is often being used as an umbrella, and we are not actually deconstructing what we mean by it.
Helga, what are you seeing in from a foundation perspective? Is the word trust used an awful lot, or is it something that is of less interest or less prominence?
So working with a multidisciplinary team of people that you maybe haven't seen before, of course, trust is pivotal. I'd say it's a foundation of working together, but by itself it's not enough. And I'd like to introduce two further dimensions that are also important for us when integrating the voice of, let's say, product end users when we design a product. Once is we design it from a human-centric perspective because we want to increase impact. When including the voices and the needs and the gaps that are brought into the product design by the end user, you automatically increase impact because you tailor it specifically to the need of the end user. A second dimension of benefit of including the voices, which is probably particularly important for us as a foundation, is once we have implemented our initiatives, call it a product, successfully, we hand them over to our local partners. And we do it to let them autonomously continue the impact of these initiatives. And to make sure that they are maximally motivated to do so, we have to involve them from the start in the product or initiative design, because they have to see there is our thinking in it, there's our sweat in it. They literally have skin in the game, and that makes sure that they have a maximum motivation to continue our initiatives, apart from that they see what the impact of cardiovascular health is.
So I think that's really interesting, and what you're saying there with regards to you have to build that multidisciplinary trust approach. And what you raised there that kind of stuck in my head is we've talked about trust in the product and trust in the outcomes, but a lot of the time that the trust kind of is really actually coming from the multidisciplinary teams themselves. And Hanno, you spoke about the fact that you'll have engineers not meeting with commercial and whatever. So who all should be in that product development cycle? And if we step back just from the patient clinicians for the second, we'll get on to them. But who in that product development cycle needs to be included that's not necessarily included at the moment? We have engineers and we have design thinking and we have things like that. But how do we truly build a multidisciplinary product in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, and I'd like to add a little bit to what Samaya was saying, is I think you will end up with a lot of the people you just talked, and all the data privacy, legal, regulatory, all those people will have a big role. But I think it's about how you work together and how you share common ambition to actually build something that patients will use and that doctors will use. And that's where I think every one of these groups, in the way they come together, has an obligation to build these layers of trust. And the problem with any app that you might use, I mean, let me focus on an app, is that you can't say, well, I like the data privacy of that one, and I like the interface of that one, and I can't mend the two. So in the end, is you either trust the whole thing, it is a binary usage. And that's where actually a lot of things have to come together, and it is around intent, it is about competence, and it's about reliability in doing what you say. And I think one of the big challenges is not only how do you bring the team together, but how do you keep it together? Because often the focus for product development is on version 1, but actually it is version 3.0 that is the challenge, where you really have built trust and where people have used it, and that's what you need to engineer for.
And that's also interesting to see that when we are working in collaborative teams, we have engineers, we have designers, we have data scientists, we have very different people with very different background and disciplines. However, they don't speak each other's languages. We work with teams which have HCI backgrounds and speak, for example, the design language very well and are talking about double diamonds and a lot of design thinking models. For my engineers, that's like a very different language who are talking about pre-processing and, raw data points, and they want to fix the whole AI pipeline. And then the pipeline of AI and the design thinking, a lot of those phases are also not one-on-one directly mapped on each other. So you also have to make sure that there is enough space and trust in between these different disciplines and backgrounds that they can learn to speak each other's language. That it's not bad for a designer to ask, okay, but what do you mean with your data training set? How do you want me to use that for the end product? So Also within the current, I think that there's also a huge gap for our students that they don't learn to speak each other's languages, and a lot of universities and educational research programs, both from the engineering side and the designer side, and HCI, human-computer interaction developers, etc., should pay more interest not only during their education, but also when they're onboarding. I think in a lot of companies, there should be a central focus in that we already entered this new era where people are talking sometimes very different languages, which doesn't result in the products we would like to see for our clients.
Helge, anything to add?
Yeah, looking at your question and answer it not from a product or app development perspective, but from the perspective of designing and rolling out a population health initiative, which is what the Novartis Foundation does for us. Two other types of partners beyond patients, but also beyond clinicians, are really pivotal. And these are healthcare system managers as well as city authorities, so the Department of Health. Why? If you want to have an impact on cardiovascular health at a population scale, we need the public healthcare system to support these initiatives and also to be involved in the designing and rollout. And these are managed by healthcare system managers, not by patients, and neither by clinicians. And the city authorities are responsible for mapping out the strategy and also for assuring the quality of the public healthcare system. So we really need these two stakeholders also on board. And second, as I've already alluded to, when we have successfully implemented our initiatives, we want to hand them over to them to autonomously drive their impact in future. And the more we have them on board from the start, the more they feel themselves reflected in it and are willing to continue impact even after we have handed over. This is why these two stakeholders are very important for us as well.
But Helge, if I may build on that, I mean, I think my experience, and certainly working with the NHS in the UK, is sort of, you can say there's an app that you can build for a patient which is standalone. As soon as you then say, actually, that data from that patient should interact with the HCP, and even worse, with the HCP and the NHS system. Kiefer is smiling because the complexity grows, and to your point around stakeholders, it becomes incrementally incredibly complex. Most companies I know have struggled with that as a system. And so I think this idea, how do you build something that is well intended, that works well, meeting all these different stakeholders' needs, I think is a challenge, but I think works only and works best when you focus on a very singular application, when you focus on a very narrow definition. Often I find people are trying to do too many things with one thing, and it just does not work because you can never get the buy-in and the trust.
So you've brilliantly segued into my next point, so thank you, Hanno. What I was going to say there as well is, so we're building these multidisciplinary teams, and the more we add to them, the more people we add, the more expertise that we add to them, the more complex that whole product development cycle gets, and the more voices, the longer it takes. So if we're flipping straight to the patients and the clinician voice, which is what we're here to talk about primarily, is what is how do we justify that as people who are developing products and are aiming to get products on the market as quickly as possible to drive and bring value as fast as possible? How do we justify the underlying value of having those patient and clinician voices that potentially the people that we're working with may see it as something that slows down the process, but in the long term is actually going to bring us better value? So how, as an audience for the people here, and how as us in our roles, how do we justify taking that step back and saying, wait, we need to include these guys in this? Samaya, do you have any ideas?
Sure. Even though I think that if you do not incorporate the patients, your end user groups, so the primary target groups, secondary target groups, within the first phases of your development cycle, you will find barriers along the way. So even though it might slow you down in the beginning, you need to do that for the long-term success. And what we have been seeing is that, especially with specific target groups, for example, clinicians are very proud that they have a certain job, and you really have to work with them very closely to make an AI tool which fits their workflow, because they have so much experience built upon the years that they will not trust an AI tool as soon as I will say, you know, it works pretty well. Look at my accuracy. Look at my prediction model. They all work with it in very different ways, and they all have very different thinkings about it. So if you don't know what these thoughts and experiences and ideas are, which you should incorporate in your application, then you will run into a lot of barriers somehow in the evaluation process.
Well, I think what I find interesting is that we often talk about the app or the solution and how people use it. I mean, if I were to ask the audience how many people are still using their fitness app that they had 5 years ago, you know, I'd probably think it's about, if I'm lucky, 20%. I can't see the hand, so I won't even ask. And so actually this is about a segmented effort. You need to actually understand what meets specific needs for different people. You know, on average, every person has one testicle and one breast. It's just not a very helpful way of looking at the world. And I think that's the same for app development. And you know, how interfaces and experiences develop, we already see, I mean, we've mentioned AI a lot, and we were joking about before. I mean, if history is repeating itself, you know, this shows you how old I am, but I still remember MS-DOS prompts. And if you look at the ChatGPT prompt today, it's actually very similar to the MS-DOS prompt from all that time ago. And I think only slowly are we developing different kinds of interfaces that actually meet the needs of different people, which is why different engines become more successful.
Yeah, and along the lines of what Sumaya has said, it's not only about making sure that your app is designed to what the end user needs, it's also about the credibility of the product. Because when you design a product and say that we actually did not integrate the voice of the customer and of the user in the end from the start, what credibility does that product have? None, zero.
Okay, so I think actually it would take a second, because I think we're really interested in that. And you know, if you're talking about how you're bringing the customer voice online, are you able to give us any examples of what initiatives that you're running at the moment and how you've included the patient and clinician voice in that?
Definitely. My colleagues Anna Nutz and Peter Speyer have elaborated yesterday morning a lot on our global population health initiative, AI for Healthy Cities, which is why I would like to use for my example our second population health initiative, which is called Cardio for Cities. Cardio is about improving the cardiovascular cascade of care in cities together with our partners. That means we want to increase the number of citizens that are screened for cardiovascular disease. We want to increase the number of those that are diagnosed. Of those that are diagnosed, there should be a higher number of those that receive managed care. And of those that receive a standardized care, the number of those that have controlled disease should be increased, with the ultimate goal of increasing or decreasing the number of strokes in the city as a readout for cardiovascular health. And when we approach a city with the concept and the design of cardio, we initially run, as we have, for instance, done in Sao Paulo, Brazil, a needs assessment. So this is a human-centric design approach. We go for a mixed model, meaning in the beginning, we identified specific patient groups, but also community healthcare workers that we shadowed. We followed them for 1 or 2 days to identify what are their needs, what are their gaps with regards to this cardiovascular cascade of care. But we also surveyed them, we did one-on-one interviews, and we also analyzed already pre-existing data to get an idea of what the needs are so that we can tailor our initiatives that are aiming at improving this cascade of care really 100% to those needs. And that would be an example how we have included the voices of patients but also of clinicians from the start of our initiative.
Brilliant. Anybody else have any similar examples that they're able to talk about running digital product initiatives?
I mean, in our case, I mean, this is what we do as a matter of course, and I think somebody mentioned it, sort of human design-centered design, day in the life of, A/B testing. There are lots of research tools that engage patients on a continued basis and physicians on a continued basis. But I think the important thing is you have to do it not just once, you have to keep doing it, and you have to really test and understand how the use of the product actually developed so you can make it better.
So, I mean, from my perspective, I think what you've said there is, it's very important, is that we've known about this, or we've at least talked about this for a long time, about having user-centered designs and, you know, including the voice of the user and things like that. Where are we going wrong? Because we're still having a panel about it in 2023. So what are we not doing right that would make this so second nature to everything that we do that a panel like this is not required?
I mean, my short answer is an eagerness to have version 1.0.
Okay. Samaya?
I think that sometimes, even though we say that we include patient's voice, clinician's voice, all our important target groups, we only put an effort in picking those patients and clinicians which are easy to reach, and we do not really put a lot of effort in getting a very good representativeness of our patients. So I do think that we do try to do that, but it's sometimes very hard to get a very good representation of the target group.
So we're already actually looking at a biased population because we're finding patients and clinicians that are naturally interested in what we're doing anyway. Okay.
Natural bias.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe that we can make far better use of novel technology when it comes to sampling bigger sizes of patient voices and also clinicians. As I've elaborated, we have been doing interviews and shadowing that is very effective, but it limits our capacity of the sample sizes. We could, for instance, use wearables to get insights on patient usage and patient voices, which would allow us to sample hundreds or maybe thousands of voices of customers way better than with classical methods.
Yeah. Well, you've opened Pandora's box in mentioning the wearables word there, so we could go on that, but I'm going to take that as a natural segue into seeing, have we got anybody within the audience? We have time for questions for this panel, and we have a great panel here, so is there anybody in the audience that feels that they have a burning question they'd like to ask? Do we have someone somewhere? Oh, great, we've got someone over here.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for that very interesting discussion. I'm Dr. Neeti Paul, and I am a type 1 diabetes advocate, amongst other things that I do. This is a comment and a question, and perhaps the panel might want to respond to that. And this is about commercial interest of large companies not holding the trust of patients. So the example I'll give you is the type 1 looping community. Of those who don't know, this was a movement started by the type 1 diabetes community, and they looped their own pumps with their continuous glucose monitors because the CGMS manufacturers and the pump manufacturers, it was not in their commercial interest to talk to each other. So there's a huge trust gap here on commercial interest. I'd like you to comment on that, please.
I have lots of opinion on this, but I'm the moderator, so I'm going to hand
why don't you
over
start?
to
Why
the
don't you
rest of the
start?
panel.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're incredibly correct, and one of the issues that we have with product development, anything, is that when you're in competition with each other, the desire to share starts to look a little less attractive. And essentially what we really need to be thinking about, if we are looking at truly a holistic approach to treating a patient and treating a disease that's actually going to add value, it needs to become a lot more altruistic, and it needs to become a lot more agnostic to product. And I think that's where we start to, because there's so much money that is invested into these things, automatically these are businesses that they want a return of investment. So they're automatically going to push for what is going to be the best of their product. And I think occasionally, and I will be very honest on this, there's a short-sighted approach to understanding that what's actually best for your product may be to collaborate with a competitor, because that is actually going to drive both products an improvement, and it's going to increase that interaction and engagement with your patients and that trust. So whilst I don't have an answer to that, I sympathise and I really appreciate your comment, and I'll pass over to anybody else here.
Yeah, I mean, I also have a very strong emotional reaction to it, mainly because I think, yes, people often say, well, commercial is bad, therefore creates this sort of bad cycle. But I've worked in a lot of public sector organizations where one hospital doesn't want to share any data with the hospital next to each other because they feel it's a league table and they don't want to be seen to be worse than their neighbor. And so I think these sort of conflicts and tensions of interest are not unique to this situation. But I do think they could require a degree of leadership and over time, and I can only say what I said before, having the right intent, having competence, and being reliable and doing what you say you're going to do. That is the only way you can build that kind of trust that overcomes those. And I think not in all situations, but in many, I think there are partnerships that form that address that.
But even your mention of hospitals as a league table, it's very much a competition. And that's where I honestly think generally healthcare is going wrong. We shouldn't be competing, we shouldn't be siloed, and we shouldn't be competing against each other for an end goal that we all have. And maybe I'm just a little bit naive and a little bit I've forgotten the word, but I'm looking at the nice case or the best case scenario. But I think if we're really going to make strides in changing how patients and how healthcare evolves, then it has to be less about competition and more about collaboration.
I'd also like to answer that question. Let me first give a disclaimer. Though, of course, our foundation has the name of a larger pharmaceutical company in it. The Novartis Foundation is a non-for-profit organization that works completely product agnostic. So we have the rest of the Novartis group at arm's length, and we do not share their economic goals. That said, I would like to make a case for the pharmaceutical industry, because what I've seen is over the past decades, the pharmaceutical industry has increasingly understood that acting against the patient's interest on a long term is against their own interest, or in other words, that the interests are very much aligned. Though it might mean for a short term, that a pharmaceutical company might not maximize its profit potential by acting in the patient's interest, on a long term it always is, always. And companies have understood that increasingly and have to look long term, which is why everything that is about the patient is nowadays done with the patient together.
I'll caveat that and say that's what they say they're doing. But to Samaya's point earlier on, we get to a certain level of it and then it's maybe not entirely followed through. So I think we do have to understand that there is a way to go for the pharma industry to really incorporate the true needs of a patient in. And I've got one more question over here.
Thank you.
Oh.
Is that on? Excuse me.
Let's see. Give it a go.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm a frontline clinician and I came because I'm genuinely interested in this stuff. I would argue that you need to involve us in the early phases, not because of trust, but if you want us to adopt your products, they have to match our workflow. And so often the products we're given have been made by manufacturers, designers, under work imagined. And so these people think they know what we do and they create a product that is completely work imagined, nothing to do with the work we do, and then they wonder why we don't adopt it. And we don't adopt it because it doesn't match work done. And so if you involve us at the start, the product will be adopted. And it's not about trust, it's about if you tell us you want us to change the way we do things to use your product, we'll go forget the product. We don't want to change what we do, we want the product to match what we do.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I don't think anybody on the panel would disagree in any way about that point. It's I think it's a stumbling block, and I think Hanno's got.
Yeah, I mean, let me just give you a very concrete example. I mean, a GP I was recently talking to, he probably had about 15 to 20 patient contacts a day, and they used a new tool to engage with patients, sharing pictures very much in a confidential way, not just over WhatsApp. And he said that actually improved his rate of productivity to about 90 contacts a day, and actually improved both the patient experience, because I didn't have to come in just for a melanoma look, for example, I could send a picture by phone, and improved his and improved outcomes. So I think those are examples where, to your point, if you really match the workflow, it can have a significant impact, both for patients and for doctors.
I think it's how we get the frontline clinicians and the frontline patients in to that early stage. We're not, as an industry, just in general, both pharma, health tech, med tech, we're not quite there at the early stage of bringing clinicians in, and I think that's where we need to be making a shift, to your point. I think we have time for one more question if anybody else has a question. Have we got another one over here? Oh, good.
So very interesting conversation. My name is Abhishek, and I'm running a not-for-profit digital health initiative to help in the area of pediatric oncology. So I'm also a parent-patient advocate. I think my comment is in the line with the previous two questions, which is money, motive, mission does come in the way. Even if we don't want it to, it does come in. And I think I just heard the panel say that we need to involve patients and physicians. I think it should be the other way around, isn't it? We need to empower patients and we need to empower physicians to create what they need, right? So my question to the panel is, who should be driving these initiatives? Is the industry best suited to drive this initiative? Are the patient organizations and those organizations suited to drive it? Or is it the hospitals? Thank you.
Any opinions?
I mean, I think it has to be all three. I don't think anyone can own it. I mean, we talked about AI a lot. I mean, AI for me at the moment is one of those classic situations where you have a lot of technical people who can imagine what the potential is, but don't really know what the use cases are. And you've got a lot of sort of users who think they know what to do, but they can't actually work out what technology can do. Mm-hmm. It's a good example where you need to come together. And I do think in these approaches, I think you need everybody to come together. But the question is who has the leadership, the vision, the drive to actually overcome a lot of the obstacles we talked about. And the budget.
And the budget, yeah.
I think if I really love your phrasing about empowering the patient, and I believe that quite heavily. I think there's also a certain amount of the onus shouldn't be on the patient to fix themselves. That's why I think if we start to say it should be the patient should be, defining what are solving the problem, really then puts the patient in competition again with the companies that are doing things. And it's, again, let's not silo everything. To Hanno's point, it's about collaboration. It's about making sure that everybody who has an investment, and I really like Helga's point earlier on with regards to the foundation versus the actual local area where everybody has skin in the game, so things are really transitioned on and engaged with and kept moving. That's the way things need to be done in the future. How is the big question, but that's the idea. Samaya, any thoughts from you?
No.
Okay, fantastic. So that's actually us out of time, both for questions and for the panel. I'd like to thank the panel very much for the very open and spirited discussion, and I really appreciate the attention of the audience and the questions and comments provided. So thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you.